Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. I'm Lisa McDuffie, the President and CEO of the YWCA in Northwest Ohio, and it is a pleasure to have you join us today. Most of you have heard me say this any number of times, but our agency is really interested in how race equity and health equity comes together. And obviously, gender equity is just as important to our agency. We strive every single day to work to eliminate racism and empower women. And these platforms is what allow us to bring education and awareness to critical topics. Every single month, we are joined with wonderful guests who have just subject matter expertise to share with you. And so I am very pleased to also wear two hats today, representing Healthy Lucas County. Under the leadership of Jan Ruma, Executive Director, there was a conversation that really took off. Both of our organizations were looking to educate and bring awareness, and what better way than to partner. And so today I'm wearing that hat as well. Let me tell you a little bit about Healthy Lucas County. It was formed in 1998. It is a coalition of community organizations working to improve the health of all Lucas County residents. Healthy Lucas County performs a triennial health assessment with data about children, youth, and adults, from which it develops a 3-year community health improvement plan with strategies and action steps. The coalition is especially focused on addressing the needs of residents living in low-income areas and lessening their health disparity. So what better way than to bring a wonderful trio to you today? Our title is Moving from Theory to Action, 3 community efforts to create equity in health, wealth, and education. Let me introduce you to these wonderful people. I'm very proud to say that each and every one of them are personal friends of mine, and I am sure you will be impressed with what they have to share. Our first person is Kate Sommerfeld. Kate is the president of the Social Determinants of Health Institute, an enterprise vice president for community relations and investment for ProMedica, a mission-driven, not-for-profit healthcare system based in Toledo, Ohio. ProMedica is the 15th largest hospital system in the country, serving communities in 28 states. With Kate, we have Greg Braylock Jr. Greg serves as the Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for ProMedica. In this role, he leads the organization's work to build culture of inclusive that leverages diversity and creates equity in the workplace, healthcare, and community. Having been with ProMedica since 2013, Greg most recently serves as Vice President of Operations in the Metro Toledo Acute Care Division. And last but not least, we have the Reverend John Jones. John is currently the president of HOPE Toledo, which is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the premise that strengthening education will increase opportunities for all Toledo's children and youth, grow prosperity in the resident, and improve the future of families and neighborhoods. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to turn the screen over to these wonderful individuals. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. I think we're all excited to be here today and to talk more about work that we are doing in the community. And when I say we, I mean our collective community in Northwest Ohio. There's a lot to be said about everything that's happened over the last year or so around our nation and even here locally, whether it's COVID, whether it's a call for greater social and racial justice in our communities. It's caused all of us to take a look at things, I think, in a different way. We could even talk about the economic downturn. And so as we consider what needs to be done, I think we all would agree that to an extent, a return to normal is not an option, particularly as we land on this conversation around health equity. Return to normal would be that we continue on the path that we were, which is not having working or robust solutions that create different results for those in our communities who experience unfair and avoidable disparities in life outcomes. And so today, we want to talk about a few initiatives that exist and how we really begin to turn health equity theory into action through local community partnerships. So I'll talk first and present about V Project, which is a local initiative focused on COVID-19, victory over COVID-19 and the vaccine. We'll have Kate Sommerfeld, who will talk more about an economic development focused initiative, and then John Jones, who will talk about an education focused initiative. All of these health, wealth, and education drive health equity, greater health equity, closing gaps and disparities, and making sure everybody can live and have optimal health. So as we talk about COVID, obviously that was and is still something that's on top of mind for everybody. The facts are pretty clear, compelling, convincing. Black and Latino Americans are almost 3 times more likely to be hospitalized because of COVID-19, almost twice as likely to die from COVID-19. And that has a lot to do with geography and location and population density. It has a lot to do with the percentage of those populations who are involved in frontline essential work. It also has a lot to do with underlying health conditions and access to care. And so I think as we think about those numbers, it's hit every community across the nation. The CDC is talking about it, and frontline community workers are talking about it. So the question is, what do we do? So here in our local community, in Toledo, Ohio, in Lucas County, and even in Wood County, we have an initiative called the V Project, and it's victory over COVID through the vaccine. And so we believe that the vaccine probably presents the best opportunity we have to move our communities forward, to get people healthy, and to move our economy forward. And so there is a lot at stake, obviously, for all of us. Many deaths in our community locally, many nationally, and even those that don't die, we see lingering effects from COVID. So this project is really focused around educating, motivating, and vaccinating Northwest Ohio corridor to dramatically slow the spread of COVID-19. Our goal is simple. We know that from a scientific standpoint, herd immunity is when you hit around 70% vaccination. And so that's what we're striving for. That's our goal for Toledo and Northwest Ohio. We have probably about 250 or so different groups and organizations involved. And so this is not a small effort or initiative with one particular sector. We have every sector from education to the business sector to government to healthcare, community organizations, faith-based organizations, you name it, and people are involved. And so, the question is, what are we doing to really try to meet our goals around ending COVID in our area? So one, there's a pretty robust information and media approach that we're using to get information out to the community, and we'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Significant partnerships between healthcare, community, and employers are also a main piece and component of this. And then finally, developing resources to support the effort through in-kind and financial donations, as well as volunteer time, which we'll talk about in terms of action, ways that you can be involved. One of the questions and the purpose of this discussion around health equity is how are we making sure everybody has access to the vaccine, particularly those communities where we know access is limited, who in some regards have been marginalized and who don't have the same outcomes as other populations. And so, I think what's really important here, and many of you will understand this, is that, having people who have trust and who have connection to share information is one of the more effective ways of getting information across, and not just communicating it, but that information landing deeply being absorbed and it resonating with others. And so we were using many of those tactics that we'll talk about a little bit more as we move forward. But at the end of the day, this is a really strong community effort focused around vaccine access, equity, safety, ending COVID-19, moving our communities forward with a very specific equity approach that has been built into it. So here, this is just a quick snapshot of many of those voices, those trusted individuals, groups, leaders, and obviously this is not all comprehensive, but it's really just to show the intentionality of what an effort probably should display when you're trying to reach a number of different populations within a community. And so you can see these are all videos that have been done by different members of the V Project, Facebook Live events that we've held, Mythbuster sessions that have been conducted. But if you look, you can see a diversity of individuals here, which is really, really important. And so as you begin to think about how do you target your message to resonate with communities that need to hear it, whether those are geographic communities, urban, suburban, rural, whether those are racial and ethnic communities, religious communities, communities of certain professions. There are many ways that you can really focus your communications and your outreach to engage those communities, and which is something that, again, in the next slide, we'll talk about more, but it's really been an effective approach to how we get information out about vaccine. So within the V Project, we probably have about 12 to 15 different committees. There's a K-12 and higher ed committee. There is a business committee. There's a minority health committee. There's a marketing and communications committee, a logistics committee, a provider committee, nonprofit committee. You go down, anything you can think of, we probably have it within the V Project with 250 organizations involved. But for the Minority Health Committee, it's chaired by myself and Donnie Miller, who is here locally in Toledo. She is the president and CEO of Neighborhood Health Association, which is one of our large federally qualified health center organizations. And so Donnie and I, we've co-chaired this. We probably have about 40 plus members of the community that are part of our committee. And so our purpose when we started off was really clear. The Minority Health Committee, we wanted to make sure that we shared information, that we created dialogue, that we collect and use available data, and then really serve as a boots on the ground force to promote COVID-19 safety, first and foremost, and then ensure access to two things, really accurate information and equitable vaccine supply in our communities of color. And so where we started, and many of you will understand this, is combating misinformation, which I think starts with a couple of things. One, it's an acknowledgement of historic mistreatment and mistrust, which yields mistrust within communities of color. Too often, I think sometimes, healthcare providers will say, oh, but today is different and we just need you to trust us, without acknowledging everything that has happened in the past. And at the same time, and one of our members on our committee stated this, there's existing current mistreatment. The disparities that exist today are not new, but they still exist today. And so there's current mistreatment, which again yields mistrust. And we want to make sure that we promote the vaccine facts. The second is supporting informed decision making. As a Minority Health Committee, we are not going and knocking on doors and saying you're wrong if you don't get the vaccine. But we want to make sure we do is give people the information that they need to be able to have informed decision making, which then leads us into the case for considering the vaccination. And so for us, the finish line is really clear. Vaccine access is number one. Vaccination is number two. So even though, we are not trying to guilt people into getting the vaccine, we do know that our community has to get vaccinated in order to move forward. So that is a goal. And then the third is safe and healthy communities as we move forward. So here is an example of some early groundwork that was done by the minority, within the Minority Health Committee, but specifically focusing on the Latino community. We have a really strong ground game of individuals and leaders that already existed in our community that were able to be resourced a little bit more to engage our Latino and Hispanic community. You see a few individuals here who are involved in a number of ways. Valdemar Velasquez, who is our Farm Labor Organizing Council President. You have Dr. Rich Pat, who has been highly involved in many racial and ethnically diverse communities across our community, who is highly involved. You have Sabina Cerratos from Adelante, as well as, and I can't see on my screen who else is there, but a number of individuals who have been involved in helping. You know, one of the things, our Latino and Hispanic data, so you see at the top right-hand corner of the screen, our Latino and Hispanic data was lagging as we predicted in terms of vaccination. And so when we started out, it was probably around 3%. It was our Black community vaccination percentages were a little bit higher, and our white community vaccination rates were the highest. You know, the amount of ground that our Latino or Hispanic population has made up in terms of vaccination percentages is actually pretty astounding. And so almost at 30%, you know, we are also targeting all populations within there. And so migrant labor, some undocumented individuals as well. And so I think this number is probably a little bit higher if we were to be able to have even more accuracy in how we look at it. But how they did it and how they're doing it, I think is really telling for us all to learn from. Heavy organizing work within neighborhoods and smaller vaccine clinics. And so we were not hosting 500, 750, 1,000 dose clinics within this community. They were much smaller, 100, 150, 200, 250, which takes more work up front to do. But I think as we can see with some of the percentages of vaccination, it's yielding really strong results. Leader and organization engagement, again, you can see many people here on the screen. I think that's Jessica Kuhlman or Molina that's there. And then high levels of volunteerism. You know, this is a community effort. You see the picture on the left. Dr. Pat, as one of many individuals, has done a great job in recruiting volunteers from the University of Toledo Medical campus and others to be involved in helping to get word out and helping to be boots on the ground to support vaccination. Here's just a quick snapshot of some of the communication channels that have been used. You know, I think a lot of this plays well for digital and virtual communications, since, you know, COVID kind of prevents you from being in people's homes and in their faces as much as you would normally. We've really leveraged this form of communication, but also as we think about how we communicate to different age bands and demographics, you know, having things translated in multiple languages for us in the Toledo area. You know, that's English, Spanish, and Arabic as, you know, three of the larger languages that are spoken. And so making sure that that hits each demographic, but also working with faith and neighborhood-based organizations and clinics. There are a number of really good examples of faith-based organizations, churches, and others who have held their own vaccine clinics, worked with healthcare providers to recruit volunteers to vaccinate, and have a really good turnout and showing with members of their congregations, as well as kind of their broader demographic that they serve in their communities. So the equity strategy. So this is really about coordination of key partners. So, you know, we all went into this with some known challenges. Healthcare and vaccine confidence is low among communities of color, and not newly low because of anti-vaccine ideals, but historically low because of everything historically that's happened within healthcare impacting negatively Black and Brown communities. Secondly, we know that for some in our communities of color, technology and location access are major drivers and determinants of whether people are able to have access to the vaccine and information or not. So those were two known challenges going into this. Early results, though, we had extremely strong demand by seniors. And this is just my own insight, the population that knows most well the impact and the effect and the real feeling of racism and discrimination and segregation, because they grew up when the laws mandated all of those things. They were the first to have the opportunity to get vaccinated, and they came out in droves and got vaccinated. I think in many ways, our seniors and the elders in our community led the way on vaccination, and that cuts across almost every population, but specifically as we're talking about communities of color, which was for some, I think, surprising. And also at that time, we had more demand than we did vaccine. And so I think that also drove more people to be vaccinated. So our focus solutions when we talk about equity, coverage and saturation. So one, we wanted to make sure that we had good coverage across particular parts of the community or zip codes where we knew people were more vulnerable and at risk for COVID, where we had seen higher rates of COVID, where we knew there were higher concentration of people of color, as well as other socioeconomic factors like poverty. So we wanted to make sure that we had good coverage in those parts of our community. And then we wanted to understand saturation. So how much of that part of the community had been vaccinated. And so for us, this was really a data-driven approach to make sure that we were thoughtful and intentional about how we are trying to make sure people have access to information and to vaccination. The second was then data coordination and allocation. And I actually start with the third of allocation. The health department, along with ProMedica, Mercy, the University of Toledo, Neighborhood Health Association, and others who received vaccine supply, made a decision early on to allocate 20%, no less than 20% of our weekly supply to communities of color. And so I think that was a very intentional and effective decision to make sure that we were driving supply into communities to give people access. The coordination then comes again with who's doing what where. And so as all of us are in community and serving and trying to meet the need, making sure that we can coordinate our resources, our staffing operations to have great coverage in our communities, and that we're using data to do that. There are a lot of people at the United Way, Devon Overton, and at the county, both in the commissioner space as well as the health department, who are looking at data to try to drive down to census tract level information to give us more pinpoint accuracy to focus our strategies. And then lastly, really a campaign strategy to move the needle. So what you see on the right part of the screen is a broader V project strategy, which plays really well also within our communities of color within particular zip codes. But there's an outbound call center. So we've moved to a point where demand was high and supply was low. That's now flipped. Supply is high and demand is flattening. And so we have to be more aggressive in how we get information to people and how we make sure people know that they have access to become vaccinated and hopefully make a decision for those that want to be vaccinated. And so one is that we have an outbound call center. We're not waiting for people to call in and call us and call the state to set up an appointment. Well, we're calling people to ask them if they have all the information that they need about COVID and if they want to get signed up for a vaccine. If they do, we're signing them up on the spot. We also have a canvassing operation. And so as we're targeting specific zip codes around the community and setting up vaccine clinics in different places in the community, we're also canvassing that neighborhood with volunteers and staff who are going door to door and doing lit drops and talking to people about COVID, the vaccine, safety, and all of that also is using targeted outbound calling in those neighborhoods and in those areas when we have a clinic there. The next would be our employer and organization pods. You know, the early days of vaccination, you were able to host very large clinics, and a lot of people would come there. As demand has waned, we're getting to the point now where you have to go to where people are to continue to make progress. And so employers in our organization or in our community, as well as smaller nonprofit and community organizations, are stepping up so that we can vaccinate specific populations and smaller populations, similar to our Latino Hispanic community strategy. And then a marketing and communication surge. The week after Mother's Day, we will be having what we're calling V Week, which is a surge to get thousands of people vaccinated, multiple clinics in multiple places around the community. It's a co-sponsored project with V Project, the health department, the city, Wood County, Lucas County, and many others to help to make this happen. But this is all driving toward getting our community to be vaccinated. So I'll end here, but as we talk about ways to take action, moving from theory to action, this idea of knowing that we have, still have, and had as we entered into this vaccine issues of vaccine confidence within Black and Latino communities. I think the approach that the V Project has taken with many of the leaders within the Minority Health Committee and beyond has been an effective approach, a very effective approach, because we're targeting resources, we're using data, we're working with trusted leaders and individuals and influencers within many different domains of community. And so if you are interested in getting involved, if you're not already, you can go to vproject.org to volunteer. We have outbound calling that's happening throughout the week, and we'll actually be expanding that as we ramp up for V Week, again, the week after Mother's Day. Canvassing, there are multiple opportunities that are already up on the website, and those will be updated frequently as we move and shift to different neighborhoods and locations. And then also get more information, get more resources, and share what you learn. We don't expect that everybody's going to be vaccinated. And again, we don't want to demand that everybody get vaccinated. For many people, it takes time. It's a process to get comfortable with things. You want to see others get vaccinated. You want more information. And then you'll make maybe a different decision or maintain your decision. We want people to be safe and healthy either way. So there's information there if you're interested in looking to find more about the V Project or other ways that you can stay safe, your family and friends as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Kate Sommerfeld, who will talk about some of the ways that we are trying to build wealth in our community in an innovative way that still affects health overall and equity within our communities. Kate.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. I was just looking at those that are attending the webinar, and there's lots of folks that are involved in all three projects, and it really does take an entire community. So huge thanks to both the YWCA, Healthy Lucas County, to Greg, to John, and then all the community partners who are involved in this work. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a project that was announced just about a month and a half ago. You may have seen some announcements around the revitalization of the Jefferson Center. For those that might have not seen it, wanted to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the new project, very much in development, and so a great opportunity to start to shape it and to think about how to get involved. Next slide. So just to jump in really quickly, we announced in partnership with a company called Bitwise, and I'll talk a little bit more about their organization earlier this year. And we announced an innovation center that will be located at the Jefferson Center. It's really focused on accelerating partnerships, supporting economic development and workforce development, and facilitating technology and innovation in the healthcare sector. Both from a racial and ethnic and a socioeconomic and gender diversity is really core of the organization's mission. And it was really important for us to think about how we could support continued involvement around catalytic projects. When you look at the median income, there's huge racial disparities around wealth. So I think the most recent stat I just saw, the Black family has about $24,000 in wealth, and this is a national statistic. It's just about 12% over the overall typical white family. For Latino families, it's about $36,000. Again, just about 19% of the overall wealth of a median of a white family. So we see huge disparities around wealth building, and the Innovation Center is really a project that's trying to drive that differences and also create additional opportunities. Next slide. So you might have heard, again, a little bit of buzz, either both locally or nationally, but over the course of the last few years, we have developed a partnership with a company called Bitwise. So Bitwise is based out of Fresno, California, and they're a social impact technology company. And so we're partnering to launch the Innovation Center along with the Bitwise folks. They will have a core group of individuals and leaders, recently named a new vice president who's originally from Toledo, has been living in California for a few years, but will be coming back. And so really excited around the talent and momentum that the Bitwise company will be having in the Toledo area. But we're really focused on a couple of different things with the Bitwise partnerships. And again, Bitwise is the core anchor in the Innovation Center, but a lot of other companies and partners will be involved as well. They really focused on three key areas. So one, from a workforce development, they offer training for those that are underskilled, underserved, with an opportunity to learn and contribute to make really an impact. And they're focused in a three-pronged approach. So first, they provide training opportunities around coding in particular. From a healthcare perspective and from an IT perspective, we're seeing huge advancements around innovation, around tech companies, and really trying to provide those opportunities for those that are underserved. Then second, provide an actual physical place to do that. So it'll be a center. And then third, as equally important is providing the pathways to industry. So it's great if you have the skills and the knowledge, great that we have a place-based approach that's located in the core business district of downtown, but how do you actually have job opportunities? And so developing those pathways once individuals get training and go through the apprenticeship program, but actually can get jobs. And, you know, one of the things as we were thinking through the strategy, we historically have invested in a lot of economic development work, but really the unemployment rate, both nationally and locally, continues to see huge racial disparities. And so I think most recently, you know, we're seeing for Black Americans across the country about 9.2% unemployment, and white workers, it's about 5.7. So again, huge disparities around employment. So how do we provide meaningful opportunities for jobs, but also ultimately the right training to build wealth over time? Next slide. So again, really excited around the downtown area. This is part of an expansion of the eBay Neighborhood Promise. So we've been investing over the last few years in financial opportunity centers and housing supports, in grocery supports and in education, but really excited to partner again in the Uptown neighborhood to start to accelerate and activate a wealth building strategy. Next slide. So here's a few images, again, from a conceptualization. If you've been to the Jefferson Center or either previously have taken classes there or you've seen the outside, this is a pretty dramatic difference. So we're really excited for the project. It'll be about a $30 million project. It will be relying on historic tax credits, a lot of very creative financing, but really trying to create that innovation center and that tech center with a lot of community supports as well. We're also in conversations with a lot of the existing nonprofit social service providers that are in the neighborhood already and thinking about how we can connect those supports. So whether it's the library, who's doing amazing work in their new space in the downtown branch, Goodwill, who has a workforce development, who's providing training and supports already. St. Paul's, which is just across from the Jefferson Center, who provides really critical housing supports, especially during the winter crisis. So how can the Innovation Center be a partner in all the existing infrastructure and supports that currently happen, but also starting to connect things like the Adams Street corridor. We're seeing more and more tech jobs relocate to Adams Street. So great partnership and momentum there. So how do we begin to connect both the at-need population, the existing social service supports, along with the tech and innovations to create jobs in a meaningful way? Next slide. So you can see, again, some of the images. If you're a construction buff, it will look dramatically different. I can tell you I was there in the building just about a month ago, and it's pretty rough shape. So it was a strong partnership with Toledo Public Schools and the city, but it will completely be gutted out. And there will be some images on the next few slides that you can see about the future design and what it will look like. It's set vacant for a number of different years, and so we're really excited to activate this building. Next slide. So you can see a couple of the images, again, very modern, really focused on the co-working space. So we'll have a lot of opportunities, folks like Jumpstart who are currently working to support minority women-owned businesses. A lot of the incubation space will be available here as well. We're still working through additional partnerships in space and layout, along with some additional wraparound services that we know will be needed as well. Next slide. So again, a really kind of cool, funky open space, and excited about not only existing businesses, but also trying to attract new businesses as well. Next slide. Someone was joking as we were looking at images around the loofah chair. So like a loofah in a shower that you use, there's these new structures, but it's a really creative design. Again, trying to foster innovation, creativity, and with a mission focused. Next slide. Great, and next slide. So you can see some of the images. Again, a lot of folks on the left, you'll see it will be an active coding space. So you'll be able to come through and actually go through an apprenticeship program to learn how to code. So lots of training, wraparound supports, community partners. There's already been a lot of dialogue for folks. We know a job is important, but there's incredibly important wraparound supports like transportation. And so if you work in a nonprofit and are interested in either connecting with the team, building out the strategy, or you think there's a great service that would be important as individuals are going through the apprenticeship program, it would be great to connect as well. Next slide. So again, just to wrap up, just timeline as we jump through. So we are getting under construction. Construction has actually started in the building. Bitwise will start to locate staff. Again, they brought in their first hire. They have, I think, 6 FTEs that will be hired in the first go, and they'll have some temporary space. Looking at the end of Q3 to actually begin the apprenticeship program. So we're excited again for them to come in to town. They are expanding in a number of different cities, and actually Toledo was the first city, the first underdog city, and they really target those cities as underdog cities to be able to come in to provide supports where there's both high passion but also high need as well. And so fortunate to have them coming into town. Again, Q3 is when they'll start the apprenticeship program. Would love to connect either if there's a service, either a pipeline to connect to make sure that folks are aware of the opportunity, or on the company side, if you have potential need for coders, we're also trying to work to create those pipelines as well. We've had a lot of support from other companies. So both Owens Corning, Huntington have been incredibly supportive in Bitwise coming to Toledo. And again, from a social service perspective, and as we think about driving an equity strategy, would love to connect either on the front end, how do we make sure that the services, the coding and the training, that we're hitting the right target, that they're aware of the services, or there's the right support wraparound, or then that pipeline to industry. So again, really excited about this project. Very new, so we're still working out a lot of the program elements. So would love to connect if you think either individually, your organization, or your nonprofit has an opportunity to be a part of the program. We're really looking for partners to come to the table. So huge thanks again for Greg, and I will turn it over, I think, to John now.
Hey, John, you're still on mute.
I knew I would forget to do that. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for having me and having us here. Big thanks to the YWCA and all the work that they're doing, particularly on the equity front, the education front, and all of those things. Obviously, shout outs to partners Greg and to Kate for what they've just shared. So I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about HOPE Toledo. I am hopeful that many of you have heard about some of the work that we're doing and how we're trying to move it forward. Greg, you can move it to the next slide. The work that we're working through is really critically important to Toledo. And I think most of us would agree that one of the biggest things we could do now is invest in our children from the standpoint of education to ensure that they are prepared. So the next few slides that I will walk through for the next few minutes is really an attempt to explain a little bit deeper about HOPE Toledo, to talk about our work around the promise, and to talk about our work around pre-K. Craig, you can go to the next slide. The mission for HOPE Toledo is to support and ensure high quality education. That is from preschool to post-secondary and trade school, literally birth to career, for every young person in the city of Toledo, with the goal of creating generational economic change for the betterment of our families and communities. So when you think about what Kate just shared, as it relates to the Bitwise work that a whole bunch of partners are coming together with, and then you think about the importance of health in that aspect from the V Project's perspective, and then you layer this or undergird it, which is what I think education is foundational. You undergird this with the foundation of education. We really are moving towards creating the generational economic change that our families need. And I would believe that from an equity perspective, and I know this to be the case, is that our job is to try to close those gaps as best as we can. You can go to the next slide. You can probably skip 2. Yeah, there you go. So what is a promise program? Most of you have heard about the work that we're doing at Scott High School. Last year, a huge announcement made, obviously in support or supported by the Cadence Family Foundation, the ProMedica Foundation, and several other folks, really working to say, how can we get a promise program lifted? And so I put here, just for background, and I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but what really is a promise program? Promise programs are place-based efforts that really try to drive an equitable access to post-secondary education. And so when you think about across the country, how this has been enacted and put in place, there's over 350 promise programs that participate with what is called the College Promise Campaign. We've got one in Kalamazoo, there's one in Pittsburgh, there's one in El Dorado. They come in different ways, shapes, and forms. Some are city-based, some are state-based, some are college-based. All of them, however, with the goal and the intent is to close those gaps, eliminate barriers to post-secondary opportunities, and help to prepare students for the world of work. If we look at the numbers, we know here in the state of Ohio, 4 out of 10 students per the Lumina Foundation don't have the necessary skills required to be able to go to work. And that is critically important that we close those gaps. Greg, you can go to the next slide. So when you think about a promise program, we said here in Toledo, how can we lift this up? And so there was a desire to change that effort. How do we do this from cradle to career? And I'll talk a little bit about the pre-K side. And so through the partnership and the support of the Cadence Family Foundation, we landed at a pilot program at Scott High School. Most of y'all know Scott High School. For those of y'all out there that may be Bulldogs, once a Bulldog, always a Bulldog. Scott is the heartbeat of our community in so many ways. And so we said, how can we support those students that were graduating out of the class of 2020 and afford them the necessary resources so they can then access a post-secondary opportunity. The program covers tuition, room, board, books, and fees after any applicable aid is applied. So all the students have to apply for financial aid. And so we were able to execute this promise. And we've got students right now who graduated from Scott High School that are in all of these various locations that you've got listed there, everywhere from here locally, UT, Owens, Lords, down to Central State, Ohio State, and beyond. And this is not just 4-year schools, it's 2-year, it's trade schools as well. And we're really excited by this. Go to the next slide, Greg, please. Here on this slide, it shows you just some early data. We had 66 participants that enrolled in fall semester. We are working to finalize data from spring semester so we can report out on that. The high GPA from that first fall semester of those kids from Scott was a 3.89. Being really transparent, we had some kids that didn't do so well. I think all of us would admit that have experienced post-secondary opportunities or college in any way, shape, and form. It ain't easy. And so we are working with those students and have great partnerships. And I cannot say this enough. It would take me days to list out the partnerships that we have from higher ed institutions, from folks who are volunteering, from the team at Scott High School, from the support from their hub there, which is supported by United Way. And I can list out so many different partners that have stepped up in order to provide the supports necessary for these students to be wildly successful. The other component of this is that, and these are why the numbers are listed there, 61 of those students are student scholars, is what we call them, means they graduated from Scott High School in the class of 2020. 5 of the participants in fall semester, 5 of them are parent scholars. So the unique opportunity is that we have a 2-generational approach in which we afford not only the student that graduated, but one parent or legal guardian. If they want to take us up on going back to school, they can do so as well. And we're real thrilled about these parent scholars because they are getting after it and not letting any barriers like age or other things slow them down. Greg, you can move forward. And so we also expanded the promise to the class of 21, and we're real thrilled about that. So those students are in the process right now of filling out applications and getting the ball moving for school. We maintain the 2-generational approach. Applications have opened up, and quite literally, we have in hand already. It's an online application for those students there in the class of 21. We have over 40 that have already applied, and we're pushing it even harder, so more will get in. Obviously, these students, the access for them is for schools in the state of Ohio that are publicly funded, with the exception of Lourdes University, which is a private institution, obviously, and also Eastern Michigan, because they have reciprocity with Toledo, and Wilberforce University, which is an HBCU. And so Wilberforce is included in that mix as well, even though they are a private institution. Greg, you can move forward. So that's our promise work. But let's be real clear. Without a focused effort on our earliest of learners, all of the work that we do in the promise side will still pale in outcomes. It's great work, and we are helping these students on the promise side immensely. But the data tells us that over 80% of our children are entering kindergarten not ready to learn, which means they are not prepared as we would want them to be to learn at the kindergarten level. So what HOPE Toledo is also doing is working collectively with a large group of folks to develop what we call a comprehensive community-based approach to early child care and education. Greg, you can move forward. When I think about what we see in Toledo, I just gave you the stat about the 80%. We have approximately 4,000 4-year-olds in the city of Toledo. And right now, all of them do not have access to a high quality, equitable educational experience in the early learning space. And that needs to change. And I believe all of us that are sitting here today and beyond would agree with that statement. We started this effort early on. I can date this back to 2019, this particular effort. And then if I look at even beyond that, there have been tons of conversations, tons of efforts of work that have been put into this. And so we started down this road in order to develop this process. What we know and what we've done is we pulled together a large group of folks in a working group led by a consultant that was helping to design what should this pre-K effort look like. Most of you know, and I know that I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, we obviously had intentions that in the issue 1 ballot initiative that took place in March of 2020, that some of this would be supported through that, and the voters in Toledo did not approve that. That's okay. We're still doing the work, and we're moving forward by doing a demonstration project. We're working on how can we get to secure public investment for our earliest of learners, and developing a Birth to 5 consortium, because we believe that is critically important to bringing all of these partners together. Greg, you can go to the next slide. When I think about the goal, and we look at the goal, and I believe every educator, I believe every parent, I believe every student that is in high school looking back, I believe every social service agency, healthcare agency, provider of services would say that the goal is to ensure kindergarten readiness and subsequent successful school performance for our children in Toledo. That is the goal of our pre-K effort. Greg, you can move to the next slide. And so with that goal, we're working with several objectives in order to get there. And I'm not going to read through all of these, even though all of them are extremely critical. But over these next two slides, these talk to really what we're driving towards. How do we get access with the highest level of quality possible for preschool for traditionally underserved populations? And it's not just for traditionally underserved, but it's for the entire city of Toledo. But we know that there is a disparity. When we talk about equity in education, we understand what that looks like. We want to ensure that providers are using the best business practices. And in the industry, they call it the iron triangle, where you're focusing on ensuring the right staffing for enrollment, you're optimizing that enrollment, and you're maximizing attendance inside of that space. We know teachers are critically important to this effort. And so we are working to develop the process so that teachers inside of the HOPE Toledo program, pre-K program, are competitively compensated, fairly compensated, but also receive the type of professional development, training, and coaching and planning time necessary to make their classrooms wildly successful and wildly producing outcomes that drive it. We know lower ratios and providing curriculum that is not just a rich curriculum, but actually is equitable, culturally competent, full day, full year. Greg, you can move to the next slide. That gives the right dosage for all of our kids. We're working with right now 3, 4, and 5-star providers to help them as they're working through to not only increase their efforts, but also to maintain them and keep those star ratings. Some of y'all are familiar with Step Up to Quality. That's Ohio's star rating system. And we recognize how critically important it is that we are doing the right efforts towards building those 1- and 2-star providers, which are providing very quality services. But according to Step Up, they are trying to drive them to get there a little bit more. How can we help those as well? So we're not eliminating anybody from the mix. We're working collectively with a broad base of social service, human service, health agencies to create those partnerships to provide the wraparound needs for those kids. We're working to engage parents and putting in place the right policies and practices so that we can do that. And ultimately, we know that this has to be governed and staffed correctly. Let me be clear, building this and working with partners is a phenomenal opportunity for Toledo. I could talk for days about what this looks like. And so we've got great partners in the YWCA. And I don't just say that because Lisa is the one hosting us, but literally the Child Care Resource and Referral Center that is there provides excellent resources. We have other partners in the space like Toledo Early Learning Coalition. We've got United Way at the table. We are working with Toledo Public Schools and Washington local schools. We have been talking with faith-based providers, social service agencies. I could list so many people who we have around the table in order to develop this. Now is the time to make this happen. We are already in the process of developing it. We've got a demonstration project in which we will sit 250 kids in seats this fall. And with the right efforts and collective approaches, we can get sustainable funding that we can serve even more kids. It is not appropriate, nor is it acceptable, in my opinion, that any kid does not get access to a strong start educationally, because that is going to provide a stronger future, not only for the kids and the families, but also for our city of Toledo. So that's just a little bit about HOPE Toledo and the work that we're doing. I would ask you, Greg, you can go to the next slide. I would ask you to go, if you got questions, send me a note, or you can go to www.hope-toledo.org. That is our website. And I think it's a pretty slick looking website, to be quite honest. And we're real thrilled that we've got a great team of people who are helping us as we develop this process and looking to advance the efforts for our children. The last thing that I will say, and Lisa, I think I almost did it on time. Please realize, everybody listening, these are our children, and I mean this with everything I got. This is our community, and ultimately it's gotta be our commitment. If we're gonna see any change happen at all, we've gotta start the investment early. We've gotta continue that investment through health resources, and we've gotta continue it in economic development so that ultimately we can see the change that we want to see in Toledo. I'm a baby of the city of Toledo. I'm a lifer in the city of Toledo. I could be anywhere I want to, and I choose to be here. And I believe most of y'all listening to this today want to be here as well. And you are here and active and engaged and involved. And there's so many ways to do so. So thanks, Lisa, for having me. I appreciate it. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is where we all say amen after the Reverend speaks.
I am a preacher, so that would have, if you did that before, I'd have kept talking. So thank you for holding that, Lisa.
I love it. Well, folks, you have been absolutely wonderful. And I absolutely clearly am impressed with everything you've shared. But the mere fact that you did it all in an hour is impressive in and of itself. There are a couple of questions that have come through directly to my phone that I want to jump right in and say, and I'm going to tee it up really by saying what a wonderful, wonderful way to thread the needle on health equity, with Greg helping us understand really what the pandemic has done. I love your words. You know, in some instances, we want to return back to normal, and normal for some people really is thinking about life pre-COVID. But you're right, we cannot return back to normal. And so I love the way you brought that out, because normal for some subsets of people was never good enough for all the reasons why we're on this screen. And Kate, absolutely love your presentation about Bidwise. It is all about economic and being positioned to have opportunity. That was perfect, because again, it ties us right back to health equity and having the ability to really have options and choose opportunities that are also there and presented for us. And John, what can I say? Education is the foundation. It is so critically important that we are starting really with our babies and getting them not only kindergarten ready, but college ready. So this presentation has been perfect. So there are a couple of folks that may kind of, I'm getting going next to a preacher, and now all of a sudden it's coming out of me, but let me get to some of these questions. Greg, for you, one of the things that wasn't mentioned was the sheer fact that people are afraid of the vaccine. What is the V Project really doing to help people with those fears? In particular, those people who say, I'm going to wait and see what happens after everybody else is taking it.
Yeah, you know, it's one, you know, it is, I don't think I don't feel that people's questioning of the vaccine is irrational. We don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. All we actually know is what has happened over the last year and a half. We know the deaths that stack up because of COVID. We are seeing the long-term effects of COVID. We understand how COVID has impacted us socially. We understand how it's impacted people's mental health. We understand how it's impacted us economically and what it's meant for people's livelihood. And so the concerns, and again, this is Greg Braylock Jr.'s personal opinion. I am not representing, as I'm saying, this, you know, the V Project or, you know, any organization, but the concerns I feel are valid. There are valid concerns because there's much we don't know. And especially if you have had a personal experience or you've been part of a community that's had a historical experience of mistreatment within any of the systems of our country that are meant to help us and move us forward. So, you know, what I would point to is that we have clear evidence of how COVID ravages us individually, our local community, our state, our nation, and the world. And the vaccine is a solution to counteract the destruction that COVID has caused on all of our lives in different ways. You know, I've had family members who have had COVID. I had, and this was early on, I had a cousin who his birthday was going to be the next day, going to turn 43. He died in the hospital in Michigan from COVID. And even with that, I still have questions about whether or not I wanted the vaccine. And so that's why I say I understand people's questioning of it. I got the vaccine recently because I made a decision that it was my best solution to stay healthy and keep my family healthy. And so I would implore people to make sure that you get as much information as possible. We've had a while to see the effects of the vaccine, at least the early effects of the vaccine. And, you know, at a population world level, the effects are minimal that we see now. And we know clearly how it's helping to fight and to combat the virus. We have new variants that are coming out that are more contagious, which poses an additional risk. You know, we just saw a spike here in Northwest Ohio that's beginning to flatten a little bit, but you know, the effects of what the disease or the virus itself does, those are very clear. And I think that, you know, the vaccine should be considered as one of the ways to combat those effects.
Great answer. You know, I know you say you don't speak for everybody, but you spoke well. Because I can tell you it resonates with me as a person who lost 5 members in my family to COVID. There was hesitation from some other family members, even after the deaths of 5. And my response to them was quite simple. You're right. We don't know what's going to happen after we get a vaccine in us 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. But if we don't get it in us, I know what COVID can do short term. And so I love your response to that. And it's my hope that if there's anyone that is listening or watching and you've not had your vaccination, that you seriously think twice about it. I also think there is some responsibility on behalf of all of us service providers and how we are working every single day with constituents. Please, please, please make sure if you are doing intakes that you ask individuals if they've had their vaccine. If they haven't, take an extra 10 minutes and help get them registered. Let them know where they can go and get it. It's gonna take collectively, all of us really out here as foot soldiers, luring people to where they need to go. So I appreciate Greg and his leadership in Project V and for being here. Let me move over here to a question for John. My understanding is, I'm trying to read the question. My understanding is other cities in our state have universal pre-K. Has the programs been around long enough where you know true impact in terms of longitudinal studies? How are students faring once they started in universal pre-K and then wherever they are now?
That is an excellent question. And so we have done some preliminary studies of the other cities in the state of Ohio who have this, and all of them are showing and producing outcomes that show increased performance by our students in the later grades, i.e. they were in a pre-K program and they did better on getting, you know, kindergarten ready. So on the KRA, they also did better at 3rd grade and reading scores. We do not have enough information to, at least in the state of Ohio, to opine effectively on graduation rates and things of that nature. That takes a little bit more time to continue to study that out. But as we are looking at this, we do see that there is an increase. Being very candid and honest, I appreciate that question. We do not see the level of increase we want to see at this present moment. And part of that reason is continual discussions around funding and access and the ability to be able to provide this. Yes, they may say universal, but the ability to really provide that universal impact, which means we have to get to the families to get them to understand how important it is to have their child at 3 and or 4 inside of an educational program in this early stage. So there are some families that say, you know what, I don't want to take my kid to a child care provider. I don't want to take my kid or enroll them into Head Start or this, that, and the other. And so they choose to stay at home. Some of it is because of cost. Whichever way that goes down, we know that not enough are actually accessing like we would want them to. So that's another barrier to the level of outcomes. But we do see in the initial stages for those programs that are running, we do see increased performance by our children and increased outcomes.
Great information. And, you know, I'm sitting here thinking about the question that the fact of the matter is we all know all about equity and whether or not the program has shown just how tremendously wonderful it can be long-term. We know the short-term effects. And I think that's what you really hit on perfectly. It is the right thing to do. Equity is important. And if you already start off where other kids are so much far in advance, immediately it does something to self. We want all of our babies starting at the right place at the same time. So
Absolutely.
we know we need it and we are supporting it. And so talk a little bit more, John, about really what people can do to help with this heavy lift to get it up and going. You know, Lucas County should not be in the list of counties that don't have universal pre-K.
Absolutely. And so there's a couple things, at least I'm so glad you asked it that way. There are a couple things that I think folks can do. Number one, please, by all means, go to our website or go to our social media, which is hope-toledo.org. I would encourage you to go to the YW's website and look at the Child Care Resource and Referral Center there. I fully know that if folks get educated on why pre-K is important, that is a huge component. If you think about the economic impacts, over 40% of our children right now in the city of Toledo are living in some state of poverty. When you think about the fact that over 90% of our kids in Toledo Public Schools are on free and reduced lunch, over half of the students in Washington Local are on free and reduced lunch, we know there is a direct correlation between education and economics. And so one of the things that you can do is go out, learn the information. We've got access to resources on our website. I know the YW does, and several other organizations have access to this as well. I believe United Way does, and a few others. Go learn why pre-K is important for our children. That's number one. Number two, take the time to really look at what is the long-term educational impacts of what this looks like. So if I were to talk to kids that graduated from high school, going into post-secondary or looking for a job, so on and so forth, many of them would speak to the fact that school has never been important to me. And many of those who say that out loud are those who did not have a great educational experience in the early learning space. And when you start a kid early with that education, they become lifelong learners. And so if we could imagine our city with access that is equitable, that is affordable for this, it would literally change that space. So I need all the folks on this call who understand that or are trying to understand it more to then go tell a neighbor and a friend why we should be supporting this effort. It's going to take all of us. This is a comprehensive community-based approach. It is not just on the school district. It is not just on the city of Toledo. It is not just on private providers, community-based providers to do it. The CCR&R can't do it all by themselves. It's going to take all of us working together with one central focus, and that is our children. If we have never come together for anything else in life, we need to do it for our children, because this is not just for today, this is for tomorrow.
Perfect. So here's a couple of questions that are similar, and I promise I'm going to move to Kate and right back to Greg with some of the questions. Here's three. I see you, Mary. So let me try to get all three of hers out here. What has TPS done in pre-K education is one. And I can repeat these if you get it mixed up, Reverend John, just in case. Okay. How can you change parental engagement? And how is this different from Head Start that hasn't been successful in grade 3 competencies?
So thing number one, as it relates to Toledo Public Schools, yes, they are engaged in and have been doing early learning work. for quite some time. Obviously, they are for those of you that don't know, and some may not know, they are the Head Start, one of the Head Start grantees in this neck of the woods. And so they are engaged, they are as part of the process. And the way I like to say it, and Dr. Durant and I have had this conversation numerous times, they cannot be the sole purveyor of educating our children. This has got to be a community-based approach. Yes, I get it. They're the school district. I completely understand that. And I'm not here to say they should not be doing X, Y, and Z. I get it. I hear it. But we all have to work collectively together to make this happen. So yes, TPS is involved. TPS is doing some of this work. I'm going to jump to number 3 because you mentioned Head Start. I'm going to tie those two together. Head Start, yes, is a part of this process, but let us be very clear. There are not enough Head Start slots in this region to cover all the kids that need it. Some of the kids don't qualify for Head Start. And even the ones that do qualify, we still don't have enough Head Start slots for this space. It is crucially important that we find ways to increase that funding. And for those that may not qualify, how do we find them access? Because for those of you who may not know it, when you base it off of federal poverty guidelines and things of that nature, if I make X amount of money above the federal poverty guideline, I don't qualify to get access to a quote Head Start. So how do we ensure that those families that need to pay, how can we help them with that? That is what HOPE Toledo is here to do, to provide that comprehensive community-based approach. And then there are families who are just choosing not to do that or may not do it. They may send their kid to their grandparents. How do we ensure that we provide them resources so they can do some education in the home? The third thing that you mentioned was parental engagement. One, let me be very clear. I am fully and 100% confident that most parents, I will never say all, that is an absolute statement, most parents are actively and passionately involved in wanting to see their kids educated. Unfortunately, the environment that we are in, if you heard some of the data and statistics, because of what we've experienced from COVID, over 2 million women have had to leave the workforce so that they could go home, and that's across the country, so they could come home, take care of their kids, because the kids have been at home doing homeschool and virtual learning and remote learning. When you think about what that does to the workforce and think about what that does to our families, some of those parents need to go to work. And so their engagement and the parental involvement, they are passionately and actively engaged and involved. Yes, you may have a handful that may not do what we think parents should do, but let me be clear. Let us not vilify, and I'm not saying the questioner is doing this, but I don't want us to vilify parents. We also need to help parents be engaged and involved. And I know through processes like active engagement and developing programs like weekend bags, activity kits, learning kits for kids. And we're working with several providers like YWCA and working with providers in doing this, like Toledo Early Learning Coalition, and working with their providers to do this. How can we ensure that we're giving the families the resources to be effective? Let me be clear, and I'm gonna stop talking. If my educational experience was not all that great, it creates an automatic barrier for me to be as effective as I want to be to serve my child in the way I need to. And so it's critically important that we help remove as many of those barriers as possible and provide the resources necessary so parents can engage and they know how to engage. I know for a fact, because I tried to help my son with this new math, I need somebody to teach me the new math so then I can help him with math. So let's be clear. It's not as easy. It's easy to say parents need to be involved. I need us to make sure that we understand that there are levels to this, and our job at HOPE Toledo is going to be working with those parents directly to get them to understand how they can be engaged. Thanks for that question.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me run over here to Kate. I'm not sure that you can answer this because it appears as though you're really in the pre-development phase and you're starting to clear out the building. But if there are individuals that are interested in partaking in some of the programs that you mentioned that are going to be in the newly renovated Jefferson Center, how do people sign up, or what will that process look like?
Yeah, great question. So Bitwise, as I mentioned, I think earlier, they will likely start the apprenticeship for coding Q3 of this year. And so there will be some formal announcements that go out, really recruiting individuals who are interested in learning how to code and going through and starting the apprenticeship program. It's both learning how to code, but it's also the wraparound supports, ultimately to get a job. And so again, likely Q3 is when that will open up. There will be big announcements to recruit. If you're in an organization that has works directly with individuals who this would be a great fit, you want to get your cohort or the group of individuals that you are familiar with or working with, would love to connect. You can connect with me directly, kate.sommerfeld@promedica.org. And then there was another question. The VP that was hired from Bitwise name's actually Tammy Sherman. So Tammy's in the process of relocating from California to Toledo, still very much joining the team. But again, there will be big announcements once the Bitwise team is in place in Toledo. In the short term, happy to connect directly. Again, that was kate.sommerfeld, no I, @promedica.org. Thanks.
Sounds good. Sounds like one more question just popped up. Is coding only available for youth, or can older adults also learn?
Great question. Yeah, so it actually is targeted for individuals over the age of 18. We are working on some opportunities to connect to youth, but it's really focused on over 18 individuals going into the workforce.
Okay, perfect. Kate, I'm going to also put you on the spot. I know you were here and shared great information about Bitwise, but give us 2 or 3 minutes about social determinants of health and really all of that work and how even that connects with moving from theory to action.
Yeah, so broadly in healthcare, I know there's been a lot of panel discussions talking through this, but the definition and how healthcare traditionally has thought about health is really broadened, right? So historically, we would think about, well, what are your physical symptoms? How do we treat a disease or an issue you might have? But healthcare, both providers, but also payers have really started to shift the way that they think. Now, many of us would argue it's not fast enough, that we need to push that further, but it's really that broad definition of health. It's not only what happens inside the doctor's office or what happens physically. The work that Greg talked around about education directly impacts overall health and well-being for a child. Obviously, COVID and the vaccine project directly connected. So social determinants is kind of an industry buzzword for a lot of the work that many of you have been doing for decades, or your organizations. It's housing, it's education, it's transportation. It's really that holistic version and vision of health. And so all the work that happens, really trying to connect that both at an individual level. So what are the needs of someone who might be homeless today? How do we get them connected into stable housing? But also more broadly across neighborhoods. What are the trends and the needs, whether it's around transportation? A lot of dialogue happening right now about our public transit system in Toledo. We know we need a strong public transit and a lot of work to try to build that. So both, again, at the individual level, how do we understand social need, connect to resources, but how do we also drive investment and supports across neighborhoods and communities, especially in those neighborhoods and communities that historically have been disinvested in. I was on a panel with the Fair Housing Center last night, and there were some experts out of New York that were talking about the patterns for redlining. And unfortunately, what we see around housing patterns in the early 60s continue today. So you can actually overlay the maps, again, from the 60s to today around both redlining, around infant mortality, around pre-K. And so it is this really focused perspective on driving equity from a neighborhood perspective that we continue to have to push the needle. Good work happening, but we're still seeing disparities in infant mortality, right? And that's actually growing. And so how do we continue to have that broad definition of health?
Mm-hmm. I think it's perfect, because I really was hoping you would take it there, because what I really want to do is speak just a few moments to individuals who may be on the line, who maybe have thought this and didn't put it out there as a question, but want to know, why is the healthcare industry all over the place in these different pockets? And there are times that people ask those questions. They're a hospital. What are they doing in economics? What are they doing in education? You are the epitome, truly, of an anchor institution. Not only do you admire a problem, but you move this community to action by the leadership you've taken, really even in all the initiatives and what you brought forth today. But we know that there are so many other things that ProMedica is working on. And so on behalf of my agency, I want to thank you all for that, because you truly are changing lives. You are much more than healthcare. And for that, we are so appreciative. It's my encouragement that people take the time and take note of the email addresses that these kind folks have clearly put in the chat. If you are interested in participating in the VEED project, Greg and Donnie both would love to have you. If you need more information, I heard Kate say if your nonprofit is interested in even being a part of that initiative, please reach out to her. And we already know clearly, in order to have a comprehensive strategy for our babies, seeing them really from birth all the way through, it is going to take a community, this entire village of a community, to make universal pre-K happen and to wrap our arms around HOPE Toledo. Thank you so very much for joining us today. As always, please see the YWCA website for further information on Lunch and Learns and all of the other initiatives we're doing. If there's interest in joining Healthy Lucas County, reach out to Jan Ruma. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And again, thank you for joining us.